let's take these one at a time. And really, there's a lot of heat and light. What is really there? With respect to Mr. Manafort, what does this really mean for the president?
Well, it's a little complicated. We don't know what it means because so far, I mean, I think it's fair to say the president's probably right to suggest, well, you know, where's the evidence of campaign collusion with the Russians? Wasn't that the whole purpose of the investigation? These are crimes related to bank fraud and tax evasion and those sorts of things. That's what the jury was able to agree on. But obviously, it's the president's former campaign manager. That's not a great day for the president. Where does it go from here? I mean, he's facing another trial in a separate proceeding in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia in October. And so I would expect to see if there's anything that Paul Manafort has that would be of interest to Bob Mueller's investigation, you were likely to see some evidence or some indication about you know, whether or not Paul Manafort cooperates, and he's going to have to make that decision, it seems to me, probably prior to the start of the second trial.
And we don't know whether he knows anything that would be helpful to the prosecutor with respect to President Trump. But if he did, wouldn't he have already made that deal? Isn't it getting kind of late to make that deal?
I mean, likely that's right, which is why I think it's fair to suggest, well, if he had it, where is it? And you know, that doesn't preclude that it, you know, under pressure now of 8 felony convictions, that if it's there to be gotten, you would think that, you know, now would be the time, or certainly before the second trial starts in October. But, you know, on the other hand, if he had it to give, you'd think that he would have already given it. So it's a little hard to say where that one goes. Now, the other one, Michael Cohen, has attracted attention, you know, not with regard to the financial aspects of it and the tax stuff, but largely as a result of his guilty plea to the 2 campaign finance, you know, the campaign, you know, the Federal Election Campaign Act violations, which, you know, the reporting has been, well, he implicated the president. Well, that's a little bit more complicated than simply that. And while Lanny Davis, one of his lawyers, suggests that, you know, if Michael Cohen has committed a felony, that necessarily means that the president is in the same boat with him. I don't know about that. I mean, that's a more complicated question.
Well, let's break that down. I mean, here's the Lanny Davis tweet that you're referring to, saying today Cohen stood up and testified under oath that Donald Trump directed Cohen to commit a crime by making payments to 2 women for the principal purpose of influencing an election. If those payments were a crime for Michael Cohen, then why wouldn't they be a crime for Donald Trump? So, Robert, why wouldn't they?
Well, you have to parse that statement. I mean, it's a direction to make a payment. But in order to show that Donald Trump has criminal intent, you would have to show that he willfully and knowingly directed Michael Cohen to commit a crime. I think that's, you know, it's a little unclear exactly what the direction was.
Well, how would he direct him to make a payment and not?
Well, first of all, if
the payment is criminal,
let's just step back a second. First of all, the president, Donald Trump, then the candidate, has the right to spend an unlimited amount of his own funds in connection with a campaign. He could get himself into trouble to the extent that he doesn't report as an expenditure something like a payment to these 2 women. You would have to show that Donald Trump was knowledgeable about the fact that what his lawyer was going to be doing was actually to commit a campaign finance violation, meaning that it would be funneled through a corporation, which is an illegal corporate campaign contribution, and that it exceeded the $2,700 threshold, which is something that would be personal to Michael Cohen. It doesn't apply to the president unless he knows that that's in fact what was going to be accomplished.
So let me get this straight. If the president, say there's no Michael Cohen, if the president himself went to Stormy Daniels and said, here's some money, I don't want you to talk, that wouldn't be criminal?
No. Why? If it's an in-kind campaign contribution, he's entitled to spend an unlimited amount of his own funds, and the only thing that he would be required to do would be to report that as a campaign expenditure under the campaign finance laws. There's nothing illegal about that. He's allowed to spend. The limits, as the Supreme Court has held, the limits don't apply to the candidate. The candidate himself is allowed to spend an unlimited amount of his own funds to finance the campaign. He has to account for them, and there are disclosure requirements, but there's no prohibition with regard to him. Now, the problem here is that the payment was made by a corporation, and corporate campaign funds can't be used to contribute to a campaign. That's one problem. The second problem is that for Michael Cohen, it exceeded the $2,700 limit, that's for someone else making a contribution to a candidate's campaign. That prescription doesn't apply to Donald Trump, the candidate.
So, Robert, I think you've established, beyond question, that there's a lot of hoops you got to go through here. Let's assume for the moment, big assumption that Mr. Mueller got through all those hoops and decided, you know what, I think I do have evidence the President of the United States committed a crime. Is he going to indict him? There's a policy under the Justice Department that says you don't indict a president. It's not clear that legally you can't.
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, separate and apart from whether this person is the president, this is a rather technical area of the campaign finance law. This has been tried before. They did something similar to this in connection with John Edwards. That didn't go so well. Yeah. That resulted in an acquittal. So that's sort of the first thing. It's a rather technical thing. That's not to sanction the conduct. Right. I mean, this shouldn't be done, and this needs to be exposed. So I'm not condoning what was done, but that's a far cry from saying you're going to return a charge. That's the first thing against anybody. Right. And then the second problem is you're going to return a charge against the President of the United States. That raises some real constitutional problems. And under current Department of Justice policy, unless it changes, and it is policy that Bob Mueller, after all, is required to follow, a sitting president cannot be indicted. So where does this, you ask the ultimate question, where does this go? It goes into a report, and it ultimately is for Congress to decide whether or not an impeachable offense has occurred. And as one of your prior guests suggested, I mean, this may be bad, but let's not overstate the news here. We're sort of close to it. Is it bad enough to warrant high crimes and misdemeanors in the in the view of whoever decides this, whether it's a Democratic House of Representatives or a Republican House of Representatives, after the midterm elections? Who's to say? Right. But that's a significant question, and it really is a question of judgment about whether or not you think that's a high crime and misdemeanor.
As we say in the vernacular, it looks like a tough putt.
Well,
that's really helpful. Perspective.
I do think the considerable wisdom has been This is a historical moment. Right. We've passed through this before in connection with the Clinton impeachment. I think some lessons have been learned. I think the country would pause, even the Democratic Party would pause at whether this truly is an impeachable offense.